The Flash is truly a unique moment in cinematic history. Not because it changed the superhero genre as we know it, or anything close to the bizarrely triumphant praise that people like James Gunn lavished upon the film before its release for some reason, but we were made to believe that this was not only a summer blockbuster, but the ultimate comic book film of all time. One that unites all previous entries in the DC cinematic universe, even those made prior to the launch of whatever you want to qualify this confused and expensive abomination at this point. Well, being a mild-mannered comic book fan myself, who grew up idolizing Wolverine and Punisher as a kid, I don't count myself amongst those lucky enough to love that nearly every single title is exclusively dominated by comic book heroes. Like Star Wars, there's too much momentum to slow the train down at this point, when what it really needs is a moment of sober self-reflection.
This town needs an enema.
How did we get to this point, where someone who has very credible accusations of child abduction, grooming, kidnapping, and potential abuse were seen as an inseparable part of not only a franchise, but an entire brand moving forward? The Flash was supposed to unite all the elements of the DC world building into a singular vision of nostalgia and action figures. It was supposed to be a heartfelt journey that would connect with viewers, weaving their own lifeline of nostalgia with characters into a relatable story about love and family. Instead, it's just like every other film in the DC universe. Angry. The launch of the modern DC comic book universe began with Zack Snyder's Man of Steel in 2013, which in many ways was pitched as a successor to the Dark Knight trilogy by Christopher Nolan. Nolan himself co-penned the story concept, which was eventually adapted into a script by David S. Goyer, and really set the dour, confusing tone for a decade of grim, dark superhero films. The failure of previous uplifting Superman reboots and the success of the Dark Knight trilogy seemed like a logical pathway for the studio going forward.
But he wanted it to be a Zack Snyder film. Like, he said that. I've heard him say that. So,
catapult the success of the Bat Nolan films directly into a massively expansive world-building universe that would take what fans had come to love about the more grounded comic book films and use them to launch Superman back into the cultural consciousness. It made sense on paper, but had all the fatal ingredients of what would blossom into a decade of soulless, depressing cinema. Batman works as a hero figure based in reality because at the end of the day, his only superpower is money.
It's a utility belt, not a money belt. $6 million.
$7 million.
He's rich and can afford rich things, can also get away with being a terrorist because, again, he's rich and powerful. It works as a detective story because he is, after all, a detective. Superman is an alien god king with powers so mighty that he could destroy the planet if he wanted to, but luckily decides to stand for truth, justice, and the American way, rather than enslaving the entire human race. He's a corny, idealized version of the white American dream. No one wants to watch him battle with anxiety and depression. We experience enough of that in our real lives. Man of Steel is not without its merits. The movie does an incredible job of world building with the jaw-dropping opening sequence on Kal-El's home planet. There we meet his biological father, played beautifully by Russell Crowe, who is only outdone by Kevin Costner, playing his loving and adopted father. Both father figures play important roles in helping shape who Clark would eventually become, and help set the stakes when a genetically engineered Zod arrives and threatens to take away what has become the very reasons for Superman's existence. Women don't take up as much of the screen time, with Lois Lane being mostly forgettable. The exception being Superman's mother, Martha, played to pitch-perfect perfection by Diane Lane. All this world-building suffers, however, at the hand of the third act that devotes itself to a Transformers tier level of planetary destruction and good old smashy-smashy. By the end of the film, it's unquestionable that you've seen a Superman-based blockbuster, but one that results in tens if not hundreds of thousands of dead civilians, and a thoroughly depressed hero. We want to watch the sexy man fly around in his underwear and save people from falling planes. And not that the film wasn't itself a success commercially, but it launched an entire series of films with a bigger focus on what worked before than what could be. And what worked before was Marvel.
Do you think that there are too many superhero shows and movies, and because I remember when I did Smallville, there were
Beginning with the first Iron Man and shortly after a series of singular hero-centric films, eventually blossoming into an empire of cinematic world-building and franchises. Disney's Marvel films became the industry standard, not just for comic book films, but for summer blockbusters themselves. Gone were the modest budgets and risk-taking, and in came the monolithic empire of what to expect when you dish out $20 to spend a few hours in a movie theater. It turned actors into superheroes as people began to call Chris Evans Captain America no matter what films he starred in between. Each individual Marvel film established a unique origin story of both a hero and a villain who would become recurring characters in movies sometimes budgeted at $500 million. It was soap opera for the movies and could single-handedly bankrupt studios, but the risk paid off. By the time The Avengers came out in 2012, the standard had been set, and clearly DC thought they too could accomplish such a monumentally massive task such as building an entire hero universe to match the House of Mouse. So, a pathway was drawn and presented to the world. Man of Steel would be followed by two of the biggest comic book heroes of all time facing off against each other in what would surely be a life-changing experience.
Find them.
And what an absolute nightmare. Batman vs. Superman, Dawn of Justice would become the unfortunate template for the DC Universe films going forward. Extremely cocky, expensive, and underwhelming.
The bittersweet pain among men is having knowledge with no power, because that is paradoxical, and
One person I should immediately mention is Batfleck. Poor Ben. See, I was one of the many people who not only despised his casting decision, but felt somewhat justified in my revulsion after seeing Batman vs. Superman. After all, I had been like everyone else on the internet, completely wrong about Heath Ledger, so surely I would need to redeem my film credit Batman points. When, if I'm being honest, he's really kind of the Keanu Reeves of Batman.
Do you bleed? You will.
See, Keanu is renowned for how serious he takes his roles, and even when he's stuck in questionable scripts or projects, he does everything in his power to make a role memorable. It's not Ben's fault that Batman is a fascist. He didn't ask for him to torture and brand people so they would be assassinated in prison. Ben was just dealt an unfortunate hand to take on the cape when the franchise was so confused and unsure of itself.
Because I imagine there was a lot to be learnt on that.
It taught me not to do interviews with Henry Cavill where I don't say anything and they can lay Simon Garfunkel tracks over it. That's one thing I learned.
What this movie is angry. It's a fury of male angst where the very concept of men rising to the status of gods is put into the focus. The fragility is best told through Jesse Eisenberg's Lex Luthor, who is a villainous and awkward nerd trying desperately to compete with the newfound gods who live among us. The male ego and necessity to prove oneself is present, but never explored. Instead, it reverts to a Christian father and son dynamic and the most ridiculous attempt at bridge building in cinematic history.
Please, stop!
Why did you say that name?
It's his mother's name! It's his mother's name.
Again, people don't want to see Batman doing his best Ron DeSantis at Guantanamo, or Superman deciding, okay, maybe I am benevolent Hitler. The film is loud, obnoxious, and bloated. It's not so much a movie as it is an expensive tech demo for potential Schneiderverse, where epic CGI-ridden action sequences give boys the dream of seeing their little toys smash into each other on the largest possible scale. It's not completely devoid of any redeeming qualities, but none of them even croak anywhere close to making it anything other than a mess. While a critical disaster, the film still made enough money to justify its existence, however dramatically underperformed when you consider it contained two of the most recognizable characters in all fiction facing off against each other for the first time. What's worse is rather than have any patience or coordinated collaboration with multiple writers and directors that was necessary to prepare for the upcoming Justice League, it threw together multiple characters in a single throwaway sequence that feels like Goyer is screaming at the audience, "Get ready to spend more money, you sick freak cucks." These are supposed to be movies about heroes, about justice, about hope, how against insurmountable odds and thanks to a little luck, our caped crusaders were able to thwart a villain and save the day. When it came to the DC universe itself, it seemed like nothing could save it. And then came the trailer. Suicide Squad, an unlikely collection of side villains and the premiere of Jared Leto's Joker, the most iconic villain in history. Expectations on the announcement of the project on the heels of two massive disappointments for DC were low. But the Jokito was just enough to keep fans salivating until they saw the Queen-driven masterpiece that was the Suicide Squad trailer.
Seriously, what the hell's wrong with you people?
We're bad guys. It's what we do.
In the annals of trailer history, this will go down as a unique tale because it was so well received that it forced the studio to go back and reshoot and re-edit the entire film.
I wouldn't want you to break those perfect porcelain cap teeth when the juice hits your brain.
David Ayer's version of the film would clash with the editing house that developed the trailer for the film, and the end result would be a 2-hour music video. Yeah, that's seriously just what it is. The movie is just a fury of popular anthems, edited in a seizure-inducing way to act like it's hyping itself up, and like most hype never goes anywhere.
You're a hitman, right? I got a contract. Kill Harley Quinn. Do it for your freedom and your kid.
Oh, she did.
Not to mention, Leto channeling Ace Ventura for his inspiration is one of the most bizarre and awkward and ironically hilarious aspects of the film.
The fire in my loins. The itch in my crotch. Oh, the infamous Harley Quinn.
In a totally separate video one day, I'll explain how this kind of coincided with a lot of mythos surrounding the man being shattered, in large part due to him being accused of grooming multiple underage fans. This movie is also spectacularly dark. And I don't mean in the gritty way, as in it's literally difficult to see what's happening in any light setting. This is a problem that plagued a lot of the DCEU, and Suicide Squad is unquestionably its most objectionable entry in the I think that's a bad guy. It's hard to tell, it could also be Batman. The chaotic seizure-inducing editing, uneven character development, and laughable reality of the trailer versus the film left those who saw it with grim expectations of what was to come from the DCEU. And it was a woman that ended up saving the day. A Wonder Woman, to be precise. But that story will be told in part 2, so stay tuned, friends. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. Could you really help us out? It really helps when you like, thumbs up, hit the bell icon, and then comment on what you thought was the best part or worst part about these videos, or what you'd like to see us do next. It contributes towards us getting more views in the algorithm, and generally just helps us out. So if you could take 2 seconds to help out, we'd really appreciate it.